good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, March 4th, 2024. Usually the work sessions are pretty informal, and we don't have the pomp and circumstance that goes with that. But tonight, what happened last week, I still would like to observe a moment of silence for Officer Cody Allen and Jackson County civil process worker Drexel Mack. Their loss of life, and keep them in your thoughts and prayers, and their family as well, and for the officers that were wounded in that particular incident as well. You keep them in your prayers. So if you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We only have the one item on the agenda this evening. I think Mr. Murdoch has another item to discuss after this, but we'll move on to the Raymore Sign Code Ordinance. Mr. Pureborn has kind of excused himself from the evening. He didn't want to infect the rest of us. He's come down with a nasty cold.
It is bad, and you know it's bad when he's taking the night off
no kidding.
From a meeting. So good evening, everyone. We do have, as mentioned last week, a presentation for you tonight on the sign code related to recent court cases and statutes as it pertains to then what we do in relation to signs. So we'll turn it over to David Gress and Mr. Eppert for that presentation. And I know Mr. Zur will also be participating in this and have some comments related to it as well. Feel free to stop him if you have questions as we go along, or we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we're excited to, and the notion of recent will go back as far as 2015 on a couple court cases. In general, the city, and I think cities across the board, were hopeful that there would be maybe some reversals or interpretations of some of the legislation that came out of the Reed versus Gilbert sign case as it relates to sign codes and restrictions of free speech, but it looks like there will not be any changes to that, the outcome of that case, and so most cities are now figuring out what they need to do permanently within their sign code to bring it into compliance with the ruling of the Supreme Court. So just to highlight a couple of things, Mr. Eppert and I will kind of tag team the presentation tonight, but just to discuss a couple of things relative to sign permit activity that we see today in our department, kind of an overview of the Reed versus Gilbert case, and as well as two local cases here in Missouri that were challenged as a result of that legislation, and then kind of an overview of what that means for Raymore sign code in terms of what things need to be changed, which things are currently in compliance, and then kind of a time frame for when the council might expect to see that back in the future. So I wanted to start, before I pass it over to Dylan, with just an overview of sign activity in general in the city. So on the left-hand column up here, you have permitted sign activity. That's any permit that's been issued for a sign, whether that's a permanent sign on a business or some sort of temporary signage that our code allows. So you can see here, dating back to 2020, permit activity varies each year. We're currently up to 21 this year, but what you'll see on the enforcement side of things is these are the signs that are removed from the city because they are either not permitted or in most cases they're illegal, meaning that they're either in the right of way, they are signs that are too large to be out without a permit, or some combination thereof. But the bulk of those signs have been signs that our code officer has pulled from the right of way and disposed of, primarily because of their location in a lot of cases. So I wanted to start, I'll pass it off to Mr. Eppert to kind of give an overview of the court cases, and by any means, if there's any questions on those, I know Mr. Zur is probably more qualified than the two of us combined to answer those. So I'll pass it over to Dylan.
Thank you, sir. So tonight in front of you, you'll have three different cases that will kind of give a broad overview, and obviously if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to ask. The first case we're going to describe or discuss is Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which is actually in the state of Arizona. So back in 2015, a church that was renting from an elementary school had 17 different, if you will, yard signs out that kind of just was, had the church name on it, as well as some service dates and times. And so one of the things that occurred during this was that it was found that the ordinance was stricter limitations on essentially religious signs, even over political or ideological signs. So with that, a sign code compliance officer came out, cited the church for the ordinance that they were violating. The church then turned around and filed a lawsuit based upon the regulations violating their First Amendment and their right to freedom of speech. So with that, it went in front of the district court, was then moved on to the appellate court, and then finally the Supreme Court made a finding that essentially the sign ordinance was content-based on its face and restricted the sign code in a commutative or content-based way. So that was kind of the first case, if you will, and then obviously the two cases we'll describe are based upon this case. So this was kind of the overarching case that has now made local governments kind of feel it a little bit when it comes to content-based signage. So the first case we'll go over, which is Wilson versus Belnor, Missouri. It's kind of in the northwest corner from St. Louis. But you'll notice kind of some similarities in these cases where it's a political sign that's displayed in a residentially zoned property. With Belnor, the sign code allowed for one stake sign and one flag sign per improved parcel. They were obviously out of compliance with that because at the time, the property owner had 3 stake signs. They were all of political candidates, which of course broke the sign code law or ordinance that was in place. A lawsuit was then turned around and filed, violating the freedom of speech. And then there wasn't really a good conclusion to the case from everything that I had read. However, going through Belnor, because they use the same sign code website as we do, and so I was able to easily find it. But they have made several distinctions that are different from most cities that have not had the chance to address this as of yet. The next one is just to our south in Harrisonville, Street versus Harrisonville. Again, another political sign. There were 2 signs out. I believe it was like a proud to be a union and something about like voting no on Prop A. So with that, the sign code regulates the size, time frame, and number of signs, and then that inherently broke their sign code. I believe they have the same code that we did at the time, where it's 30 days prior to an election and no more than 5 days after an election to have that sign. They were in violation of that, turned around, filed a lawsuit, and then after discussing with Harrisonville, there's been extensive sign change since that case. So the hard part was there's no existing staff during that time to really describe, so it's only hearsay and what they've kind of been forwarded on and what they were able to describe to me.
At what level was that heard? Did that
So
stay at the local level in the county, or did it go forward beyond that?
So this was the United States District Court.
Okay. And what was their finding on that particular one, Jonathan? For the Harrisonville one. Harrisonville one, I think would be interesting.
So the Street versus Harrisonville, they put limitations and said that no, they were still operating based upon a content base, and therefore they weren't able to prohibit those. Gave a couple of good analogies within the course of the materials, and really good at the end provided a conclusion that kind of covered the city can't enforce on this one, this one, this one, and listed off the specific code sections that they were not able to enforce under the terms of the content-based policies. But it's not all off the books, and I'm sorry, it's not all unavailable now for regulations. There are a number of the cases that have covered what can be regulated. So for example, size, building materials, lighting, moving parts, and portability, and anything that's in the public property or public right-of-way is still, you can basically completely remove or completely forbid anyone from placing them there. It's just on the private property aspects of it.
Okay. Go ahead, Dylan.
So kind of going back to Reed versus Town of Gilbert, regulations content-based if one of these 2 items apply. So regulation applies because of the topic discussed or idea or message expressed, or the regulation defines regulated speech by its function or purpose. So essentially what that means is, what I try and give is, for instance, a real estate sign. We now are not in the business of calling it a real estate sign. It's now more like a ground frame stake sign or something of that nature. So you're not necessarily calling out the verbiage that it would be using, you're calling out the type of sign it actually is. So a lot of it, and what you'll kind of see later in the presentation, is changing the verbiage to ensure that we're in compliance with the content-based ordinances set in place. And kind of the second slide here, you're going to see the mannerisms in which we can kind of regulate based upon the findings for Reed versus Town of Gilbert. Would be the time, place, and mannerisms. So essentially how long a sign can be displayed, in which locations, and then the type of sign, whether it be material or the way it's displayed.
Real quickly, if I could, and this goes back to the Harrisonville Street question. The duration time frame for that was political signs that would allow for 30 days prior to an election, 5 days after the election. That was part of what the court was striking down, are those types of limitations for signage. So basically, you could have a political sign up essentially year-round at this point.
Okay, so that part of our particular ordinance is no longer enforceable?
We will have to be addressing that, yeah, and I think we will be
That's what we-
part of their proposed changes.
Okay. I'm sorry, did anybody else have anything? Any questions? Yes.
So probably for Mr. Zur, so the court ruling makes sense from a very literal standpoint, size and things like that you mentioned. Obviously, things that can impact public safety. If the sign's too large and it's placed in a location we can't see oncoming traffic, that makes sense. I would assume that they would also, they specifically denote content as being you can't regulate based on content. However, the claim is free speech or First Amendment rights. Those rights are limited within themselves. A sign calling for a criminal act, for example, would be able to be regulated and removed under that same ruling, I'm assuming.
That is accurate. So what the court does with the content-based freedom of free speech provisions is basically apply a strict scrutiny. So any of the restrictions or prohibitions that you place upon the signs have to be narrowly tailored for a legitimate government purpose. It's very, very strongly in favor of allowing the free speech to go forward. But there are times, in fact, that the court has found, yes, this is appropriate to stop this particular type of speech.
Thank you.
Kevin, did you have something?
Sorry. So in essence, kind of what Dylan summarizes, that if you have to read the sign to be able to tell the applicant where or how long they can put it out, that's what cities are now having to wrestle with trying to change. And so as he alluded to, the time, place, and manner are the types of things that we will have to look to in our code to improve or add into in the case of temporary signage, because that will be kind of the focus of our conversation this evening and any changes. But I wanted to, just in terms of what that means for our sign code today, I wanted to provide a summary to the council of what types of things our code regulates right now, both on a permanent basis and a temporary basis. But in general, our sign code regulates where signs can go based on the zoning district of the property, the type of sign, whether it's permanent or temporary, whether it's a wall sign or a banner sign. It regulates the number of signs on a property based on the use of the property. If it's a multi-tenant strip center, they can have more signs than a standalone commercial facility per se. The size and height of the sign are regulated in both temporary and permanent signage for buildings. Materiality is also regulated in terms of landscaping, illumination, electronic signs, and things of that nature. Those things would apply to any sign regardless of whether it's permanent or temporary. I wanted to focus briefly on permanent signage in the city because our assessment of that, actually, our sign code with that is pretty solid. Right now, this is just two examples of the things that are regulated by permanent signage. It's the width, the sign copy area. We restrict the types of signs in terms of like raceway letters or another type of letter sign. So those definitions are clearly defined within our sign code. So if you kind of do a quick assessment on that, permanent signs, there's really two classifications that we have right now. Either it's a wall-mounted sign or it's a monument sign. They're restricted on the number, the size and the height, illumination, and the permits for those are all consistent regardless of the type, size, location, et cetera. So because permanent signage regulations focus on the physical nature of the signage, it is in compliance with the ruling of the Supreme Court with respect to signs at this point. With regard to temporary signs, though, which is the bulk of our focus in terms for clarification in our code, the 4 items I put up on the screen, these are the 4 different types of temporary signage that we permit within the city. So the most common one that we get frequently is the sales or promotional event. So if a business wants to put up a 30-day sign, it does require a permit, and there are some size limitations to that, location restrictions, et cetera. Political signs and election signs, those are right now tied to a specific candidate or issue, and as Mr. Zur alluded to, you can put those out up to 30 days before the event or the election, 5 days after. The only exception being if the candidate in which your sign is for, if they win that election, you can then keep it up until the next general election, per se. So in April, if there's an issue that makes it to the November ballot in some case, you can keep that sign up until November at that point. Real estate signage, as Dylan is mentioning, so for lease signs for commercial or residential properties, we don't regulate that. There are some signage restrictions, so if we see them out there and they're too big, we will cite them for it and ask them to bring it into compliance. And then the same goes for building construction or remodeling signage. Those are permitted with an active building permit. So not a sign permit per se, but a permit is still required in order to have those types of signs up. So again, the same type of assessment here. The temporary sign code within our UDC does regulate between commercial and non-commercial signage, so you have to read it in order to tell the applicant what they can do. It does focus on specific issues, candidates, or beliefs. Depending on those, the time frame in which somebody can have their sign out varies, and it also dictates whether or not they need a permit for that or not. So the regulations for that are fairly inconsistent within our code, and because of that, it is based on the content of the sign, which means now we need to rethink how we regulate those things. Couple of items that also came up in our review, two things that might impact the city, because we do have two fairly large subdivisions that have HOAs or POAs. Essentially what we're talking about tonight would also apply to those entities. So an HOA or a POA could likely restrict the size of sign you can have or the number of signs that you can have, but they can't tell you that they don't want a certain candidate out in your front yard. They can tell you that the sign can be 32 square feet, so anything above that they'll remove. But basically the rules that we're discussing tonight would also be applicable to an HOA or a POA. So residents in a neighborhood could file a lawsuit against their POA if they felt restricted in terms of their freedom of speech. And then the other thing that came up in our research that was worth looking into has to do with murals. Murals are obviously to some extent freedom or an expression of speech or an idea. And the regulation or kind of the analysis of this was that in the case of a city, if they're allowed to paint murals on their buildings, then you also have to allow to an extent someone in a neighborhood to paint a mural on their house, more or less. And if the process for doing that on a commercial building is different from a non-commercial building, that's something that a city will need to look at some point in the future as well. The other item with that was with respect to the content, and so the comment you made about something that's obscene, I think there's still some interpretations on what a city can restrict with in respect to obscenities or things that are offensive, but that was a topic of discussion there, is that can a city still regulate it if it's something that is offensive in general terms, so that's worth looking into in the future. So in general, just some of our next steps in terms of where we think the sign code needs some improvement. In general, we do need to, we're kind of talking about temporary signs only tonight, but in general, we think it does make a lot of sense to redo our entire sign code and kind of consolidate things so that the permitting and some of the other requirements are consistent between permanent and temporary signage. And as a result of that, what you'll see on the next couple slides is that we're going to have to be very specific about the types of signs that our community wishes to see in terms of the look and appearance and size and height, materiality and things like that. The time, place, and manner. How long do we want temporary signs out? Where do we want them placed with respect to major intersections or heavily trafficked roadways, et cetera? And the next few slides are just some examples that we pulled from other municipalities that have more up-to-date sign codes. So this is what you're seeing now. They're very clearly deciding what type of signage these are, and then any specific requirements that they would fall under. So this was just 4 examples of signs that we have a few of in the city. A pylon sign, obviously we're a little restrictive in height right now, so that would be something to look at. But you see there's some very illustrative things about these signs in terms of what they need to look like to comply with the sign code. Temporary signage, as we mentioned, is really the area where we're going to have to get very specific. For example, right now, most businesses will put out what you see up there as a flag sign or a feather sign. Our code right now technically doesn't allow those, but because of some of the inconsistencies that we've had, we haven't been really enforcing that section. We still restrict kind of the number. We don't let them get, 100 signs on one parcel. But some of the things Dylan and I have been talking about is some of these regulations might be different based on the type of signage. So for example, a frame board sign or a stake sign, that could be limited at 32 square feet, and you're allowed one per property regardless of the message. The feather sign, usually you see 2 or 3 of those per parcel. And so we'll just kind of have to get creative in how each of these different restrictions applies to each of these different sign types. But in general, that's kind of where I think we're headed with our sign code to really make it consistent across both types of signage that we see in the city. In terms of our process, in order for this to go forward, staff has quite a bit of research to do to get something that is tangible and easy for us to review and kind of wrap our heads around. So over the next couple months, I think Mr. Eppert and I will be busy with a lot of sign research, which will be fun. But in general, in June or July each year, we generally bring forward our annual review of our UDC anyway. So our target is now to kind of wrap this up into that amendment. We have a few other miscellaneous things that we'll be bringing forward this year as well. But our intention would be to bring this forward for a presentation to both Planning Commission and City Council in June or July, with hopeful final adoption pending any comments or revisions by September, October of this year. So that concludes our presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Kevin?
Thank you. Thanks for putting that together. Very interesting. On the temporary signs for businesses, do they require a permit now?
They do require a permit right now, and at this point, they're allowed to have it 4 times a year, and there has to be like a 10-day period between those 2 events, and it's a $15 fee. So
I'm just curious, is most businesses compliant for temporary signs?
yes, I would say most businesses are compliant. You'll see one here every so often. I go out once every month, and you'll see maybe a business or 2 that has something, but we're quick to remedy the solution.
Tabitha?
May I ask that in your research that you're doing, that you go around to local businesses and ask them their feelings on this? Just because as everything's going retail, and we're trying to draw more attention, just a way to make sure that we're not hurting our businesses here by making this so restrictive.
Yeah, and I think what came up in our research is you'll see here with respect to these temporary signage, really the only signs that our code allows right now is the banner sign, which is the second one on the top, and then a banner sign on the ground. So there just aren't a lot of options for what businesses are using nowadays. The flags and feather signs is what I brought up, but there are many others that I think we'll look to include in our code as an option. But yeah, we can certainly make some sort of outreach as part of that project. I will say, in terms of you kind of asked the question about compliance with permits, the biggest offenders, I kind of use that term loosely, that we have are what we call either snipe signs, which is they go and post them up on a light pole, or something of that nature. Or a lot of businesses tend to know that we leave City Hall at 5 o'clock at night on a Friday, and they come and put up a bunch of signs at intersections throughout the weekend, and more often than not, they don't come pick those up on Monday when we come back to work. So a lot of those numbers that I brought up in the beginning are probably 5 or 6 different businesses that we see that just use the rights of way to advertise their businesses, which may or may not even be in the city. So a bulk of that is, that's where a lot of those numbers come from, not necessarily our brick and mortar businesses.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing, is that really most of these businesses that we're seeing that are doing this are not actually located in the city limits of Raymore. So.
Judge Nigro has been very good about trying to help enforce that as well, too. So first sign goes in, and it's the minimum dollar figure for a fine that goes along with it, and then he ramps up from there up to a maximum of I think he goes up to a maximum of $500 for the total number of signs, but Dylan is pulling sometimes 30 signs out for the same entity.
And Councilmember, to your point, one of the reasons that we want to continue to have these discussions is for that exact reason, right? Keep our businesses and give them the necessary advertising that they need, while curtailing people coming in from outside and just essentially planting signs all throughout the town. And so that's why those discussions are going to be really important here over the next couple of months.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good report. Anybody else have anything? Any questions, comments, suggestions? How we doing with our regulatory issues as it relates to our kill the fill signs? Are we in violation of our own code?
Fortunately, those are placed on property that we own as a city, and so those are permitted, and they're the right size that they need to be.
All right. I like it. Okay, good. Anything else with regard to signs? If not, I'll turn it over to Mr. Murdoch, and I think you had something else you need to bring up?
We don't have anything else for this particular meeting. We have the Community Foundation meeting afterward, so we can adjourn the work session and go directly into the Raymore
Oh, okay.
Community Foundation meeting. I don't actually have anything for other. So we do need to adjourn this one and then call the other one to order.
And I do that, Mr. Feuerborn asked that we be patient with his review again, and he would like, I asked him if he wanted me to present it in closed session tonight. He says, I'd really like to go over it myself, so, okay, we're gonna let him do it. No
No
executive session
executive
tonight.
session tonight, no.
All right, so we'll go ahead and adjourn the work session and call the,
And I'll hand out the agendas here for everybody, and then I'll let you call this one to order.
okay,
if that's okay.
all right, that'll work. So sit back and relax, Chris.
Okay, so we're ready to go.
All right. So I'll go ahead and call to order the Raymore Community Foundation agenda for Monday, or Community Foundation meeting for Monday, March the 4th, 2024. And I guess we need to have a roll call. Could I have a roll call, please?
Very good. Director Townsend?
Here.
Director Baker?
Present.
Director Forrester?
Present.
Director Abdelgawad?
Here.
Director Burke?
Present.
Director Holman?
Present.
Director Barber?
Present.
And Director, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you, sir. So we have in the agenda packet our minutes of the August 28th meeting. I'll give you a few minutes to take a look at that. So I have a question on the minutes, Jonathan. So I see it has, under new business, has election of officers. So we have, that was in August. Do we have to, here we are in March, and we're doing it again?
We do need to, per the bylaws of the foundation, because if you remember last year in 2023, we were about 8 months behind on meeting. We almost back up to the correct calendar now, so we do need to do that again, and then we will meet in the first month of 2025 and go through the process again.
Okay.
So we do need to tonight.
All right. So if you've had an opportunity to look at the minutes of the last meeting in August, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this.
I move that we approve the minutes from the meeting on August 28th, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, sir, I'll second.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the Raymore Community Foundation meeting minutes for August 28, 23. Any further discussion? Hearing none, do I need a roll call on this?
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Next item under new business is the election of officers.
Thanks.
You want to go ahead and describe that process for us again, please?
So customarily, for the officers of the foundation, we will have the pro tem, who will be the vice president of the foundation, a council member at large who will serve as secretary, and then typically the treasurer is the finance director, in this case, Ms. Williams. And then the mayor is the president of the foundation. Last year, that is what we ended up doing. So in August, we had the vice president be Director Abdelgawad. The secretary was Director Baker. The treasurer was Ms. Williams, and the president was the mayor. As staff, we would recommend that, especially as quickly as we've done this, that we do continue with that slate here through this next year.
Okay. Mr. Holman?
I'll nominate the current slate of officers to repeat as the ongoing officers for the remaining, or for the next year.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other nominations? If not, I'll take a second on the motion.
Yes, sir, I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Motion's been made and seconded to wash and repeat here, so
Yeah.
there's no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. I think I can vote on this.
You do.
Yeah, okay, I'll vote yes.
I've got you voting on both of the last two.
So 8-0. Next item is the disbursement of funds. Attached in the packet is Resolution 24-01. It's a resolution of the Raymore Community Foundation dispersing funds for various equipment and projects. I'll turn that over to Mr. Murdock.
So per the bylaws of the foundation, we do require council approval for the disbursement of funds, director approval, sorry, for the disbursement of funds over $10,000. This is the annual Shop with a Cop that did disperse over $10,000 this past year, just a little over $11,000. That's why you have Resolution 24-01 behind it. I do want to call your attention. Last year, if you remember, you did ask to see the balance sheet. That's why you have that last sheet as a part of your packet tonight. At each meeting going forward for the foundation, we will provide the same report, the same balance sheet that will come before you, so you can see revenues, expenditures for the foundation. I'm not expecting you to have to read through it all tonight. If you go through it over the next few days and you have any questions about it at all, please do not hesitate to ask us, and we'll be able to let you know why certain funds are in certain accounts and how we distribute those funds from the foundation, especially as it relates to when we get donations in and then the purchase of equipment that goes out for the foundation. But specifically tonight, 24-01, the resolution is specific to the disbursement of the funds for the Shop with a Cop annual event that the City of Raymore Police Department holds.
So the $11,240.17 is what they spent this year, or what we're transferring to the PD?
It's what we are transferring out
Right.
of the foundation
Oh,
as
okay.
a part of the annual event.
I got you.
Yes.
I got you. Mr. Holman?
So that's to pay for the funds that they spent this past
Past the
December.
day, correct.
Yeah, and,
Yes.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't ask that, but that's kind of what I was going. Thank you. Okay. Do you have anything, Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, sir. Just a general question. So I see we're transferring the funds out, and just looking at the minutes and from past memory, bulk of the revenues that we get are individual donations / corporate or business entity donations, like Aaron's Fund Center gave us some donations. And seeing how the parks looks like they have a pretty healthy balance. So we have a lot of community donations occurring. If we have some pretty large corporate or business donations that would account for that.
It's going to be a combination of both, but I would really have to go and look back to see the donations, because I don't want to misspeak on exactly where a couple of the bigger donations that equaled that large total. I do remember, as you all remember, we did have a huge push for donations as a part of the Hawks Nest and
Hawks
Hawk Ridge
Nest.
Park and the whole community donations that came in as a part of that. That's where a large bulk of those funds come from.
Okay. And then just the fund item other, what is that?
So that would be one that I would actually want to check with our finance director on. I know that we have had donations in the past that have come in that weren't directed in any capacity, or were directed for things that no longer existed. And so then we have to appropriate those somewhere within the foundation. There's actually a note within the spreadsheet that we have on there. You can actually see very down at the very, you can see the word balanced all the way down there at the end. That's a note from Ms. Williams that actually goes on out to talk about where some of those funds that ended up in some of those categories, how they got to some of those. So I can answer that question by asking her and send that to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was just odd because it's all negative numbers.
Right.
Just kinda-
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of Resolution 24-01.
I move that we approve Resolution 24-01, dispersing funds for Shop with a Cop.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there a second?
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded to approve Resolution 2401. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously 8-0. That concludes the business for the Raymore Community Foundation. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just a quick note, if I may.
Sure.
Thanks for the information on the financials. That was really helpful to be able to see the big picture as we're doing that. No problem. And with that, I move that we adjourn.
Ms. Adelwhite, I'm sorry, real quick.
Okay.
You don't need to answer the question. If I just read at the bottom, there's a breakdown of parks. So it does line out each big bulk item there, so thank you.
Okay, motion's been made to adjourn. Is there a second?
So moved.
Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor? We're adjourned. It's unanimous.